Second part. Luree had been caught by a creature's tentacle. It lurked in a dance hall some 5 floors above the one Luree was on, sending hundreds of its tentacles creeping throughout the castle in search of prey. It was one of the creatures that had escaped from containment. Most of its tentacles had been discovered by the guards and lopped off, rendering them useless. But those that remained were busy snatching up castle guards and other monsters, and delivering them to its writhing body 1.25 miles away. The tentacle covered that distance in 5 seconds. The speed was so great Luree blacked out, and the next thing he knew, he could make out something down below. A squirming ochre mass 15 to 20 feet beneath him, that covered half the floor of the dance hall with its body and tentacles. Its body split open in the shape of a cross, exposing a crimson maw. He was being dragged toward it. The boy heard the flapping of wings overhead. 2 brick-colored winged creatures nosedived right past Luree. Just before they pulled up, they released a yellowish fluid on the monster on the floor. Judging from the scent that assailed his nose, it must have been urine. The cruciform mouth swallowed it. The titanic beast twisted its body. Its tentacles flailed in unison, looking like the approach of great crashing waves. Those waves were then disrupted, lashing madly, twisting together to form bizarre patterns. One tentacle landed a blind strike on one of the flying creatures. It vanished into the beast's trembling maw. Luree suddenly felt himself being released. The problem was, he was falling head first. He landed on something soft. A scream filled his mouth. He was on top of the monster. All around him was a wall of squirming tentacles. There was no gap in it. At that very moment, the wall rose en masse in one direction. The flying creature had returned. It released its deadly urine. The boy spotted a gap in the tentacles he thought he could manage to slip through. The flying creature dove straight for him. Beneath it, white smoke rose. He'd melt right down to his bones. Luree ran. Beneath his feet, the beast felt like a wineskin full of liquid. He jumped. Tentacles brushed his face and hands. A chill 1,000 times worse than he'd get from seeing a snake shot through his body. His feet froze. "No," he shouted, running. In shouting, he seemed to forget the chill. He was through. Beyond the wriggling mire, he could make out the floor of the hall and a small door. That's where he'd go. His way out. Hope bubbled up within him. Luree started to run, pounding across the hard floor. He had to reach that door. Will I make it? Luree thought. Page break. The nobleman bugged his eyes. A gravity field powerful enough to crush Dee down to atoms had suddenly disappeared. Leaning out from the observation tower, Gilson stared down at Dee, who was also looking up at him. My, that barrier was made with the aliens' knowledge. I'm surprised you could. Old. That stuff is old hat. Dee's left hand jeered from the vicinity of the hunter's hip, having just come away from the barrier. That thing was using 10,000-year-old technology. But we've had all that time to evolve. Old Gilson might be a stupider foe than we thought. Dee quickly bent down and grabbed a spear that lay by his feet. The corpses of soldiers littered the floor. "Can you catch this, Gilson?" The hunter didn't plant his feet or even twist at the waist. He merely stood straight and hurled the weapon with the motion of his right arm alone. Easily catching it one-handed, Gilson let out a gasp of astonishment. The palm of the hand that had caught the spear was covered with blood. His skin had split open. "You've improved since our first encounter," Gilson commented with delight. "So, shall we face off after our discussion? Don't be surprised. That is what I agreed to." "That was more of your babbling," Dee said softly. "Should I come after you? Or will you come down here?" "Don't be so hasty. First, have a look at this." Gilson reached his left hand into the tower and grabbed something. That something turned out to be the boy Lurie, trussed up with a slender rope.
"Captured already?"
The hoarse voice said with disgust. "I caught him just a short while ago in a dance hall, now currently in use in the castle. He is possessed of remarkably good fortune, having fled from the 1001 when it tried to eat him. D, would you now see him forfeit that life here?" "I told you before, he's nothing to me." "Cease your cold-blooded posturing. Your blood may be cold, but it's not frozen solid. As evidence of that, look." Gilson took the scepter in his right hand and touched it to the boy's right shoulder. Though it only appeared to press against Lurie lightly, his arm burst right out of the socket. Letting out a scream that didn't even seem human, the boy fainted.
"What are you doing?"
The hoarse voice cried out.
"Stop it. Stop it right now. You call yourself a noble, you bastard?"
Gilson responded with mocking laughter. It was the sort of bold laugh where it seemed you'd be able to see right down his throat. And it still echoed while he unveiled his next hellish tableau. Raising his scepter, Gilson smashed the boy's limbs, ripped them off, and then for the coup de grace, made a vertical swipe that cut him in two, before the nobleman threw him to the ground. Each terrifying act had wrung a scream from the half-dead Lurie, and the instant he was dashed against the stone floor, he let out a single low moan and moved no more. "What's wrong, Dee? Don't tell me you've fallen into despair. There's still something I would have you do, in order to accomplish the desires of the great Gilson. Come. I'll be waiting further in." The Duke's golden cape whipped in the wind as he vanished, and then Dee walked forward. He didn't even glance at the brutalized corpse, but as they passed by it, the hoarse voice said, "Oh, what's this?" As if its eyes had gone wide. It had noticed that the dismembered body and all that blood weren't real.
"Dear me. That was so realistic it had me fooled. For an organic automaton. It was really well done, yes sirree."
"You just don't know when to give up." With that one remark, Dee squeezed his hand into a fist. A small scream rang out. Second part, end.